Hey, it's David here. Um, I'm a little bit unscripted at the moment, but I had this idea. People seem to be to do with stories, they seem to be in two basic groups. They seem to, one group's like, it's just a story, it's a piece of entertainment. You consume and you throw away. It's just a story. And then there are those of us who are bonkers enough to do cosplay and fan art and create within the universe of their favourite story. I've known a long time how powerful story can be. I've probably mentioned before, I didn't have a very nice childhood, for the most part. And there were a lot of situations where I was too little. I was completely helpless and I couldn't get away. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't run away, even though I tried a couple of times. And when you're powerless, when you can't change the situation, there are only a few ways that you can get through that. A lot of people break. They just break. Not to say you're unrecoverable if you break, but sometimes you just break. A part of you breaks and you stop feeling, or you stop caring, or you figure out how to change the story of it, you pretend that what's happening is alright, that it's normal. And that's breaking as well. I have this sort of, it's both a blessing and a curse. I don't break, not in that way. I've had people try and destroy me multiple times. And every time, story, to one degree or another, has saved me. And my inability to surrender. I tend to break and then pull myself back together again. Make myself stronger. But not usually stronger in the let's hurt other people way. More stronger in the I will define my own life. I will be who I choose to be. I will not let them decide who and what I am. And I was like that from the very first time I was abused. They don't get to win. They just don't. And by surviving, by existing, by refusing to stay destroyed, I win. Even though I couldn't change what they were doing, I couldn't change what happened, I couldn't take any power in the situation. They could not win because I refused. And one of the tools I used to refuse to die, to refuse to be broken permanently, to refuse to let them win, was story. Now, I believe that humans are, well, firstly, creatures of community. Our true happiness, our true essence is one of community, of relation to each other, forming bonds, connections. And as a result of that idea, I think that the reason why the world is so sick right now, it was sick in the past as well, the illness that comes in humanity isn't necessarily hatred, isn't necessarily religion or any of the other causes that people think it is. The problem is a lack of connection, a lack of community. The Western mindset is so focused on the individual, it's forgotten that we are a community. We are a communal species, spiritually and mentally and emotionally and just on all levels. We're meant to be groups. We're meant to be communities. I don't know if we're, packs or herds, but that distinction is probably irrelevant for humans because we were both hunters and prey. But we're meant to be. We work best, in general, happier, more fulfilled, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually more healthy when we are in relation to community, where we have a community identity. And before the modern age, community, individual identity within communities came from stories, from myths. There were stories of ancients and ancestors and different people found both their individual and their community identity in those stories. And those stories informed their identity. I'm trying to figure out how to translate it into English. And the part of me that feels very Māori, even though I'm not fluent in te reo, I feel as if my ancestor is the mountain. Taranaki, Mount Taranaki, is my ancestor, my blood ancestor. Not necessarily, having babies, but the origin of my existence in this life goes back in a line through my ancestors and back to the mountain. And that's not necessarily a literal sense, I mean in a mythological sense. My identity, the core of my Māori identity is the mountain. The mountain is a great mythological ancestor. And so my identity is grounded in that connection. If you don't know who you are, if you don't know where you've come from, you can't know where to go in the future. If you're not standing on a bedrock, on a boundary, on a foundation of identity from the past and your ancestors, it's like you're floating in space. There's nothing to ground you, nothing to say, okay, that's the direction I've been behind me. This is the direction I'm going. So I'll go in this direction. If you don't have that connection, you're floating. There's no direction. And a lot of people end up just going from one thing that makes them feel good to the next thing that makes them feel good. And it's no real life. You've got to be a human being, not a human reaction. You've got to stop and breathe and feel and think and choose. And myth informs that identity, informs that foundation. And it doesn't have to be like a genetic or a blood connection. All you need is the story that connects you. I'm not sure if that makes sense to a Pākehā mind, a Western mindset. To me, story is more than just story. It's not just a temporary entertainment. You read the story, you cry, or you laugh, or you whatever, however you react to the story, and then you discard it. Stories construct your experiences, how you think about things. It adds to your identity. I don't know about you, but I can think about all sorts of stories throughout my childhood and 10 years that really seriously impacted my identity. You think about a movie that you watched as a teen and it transformed how you thought about things. One of my movies is The Matrix. um, because it linked together a bunch of philosophical and spiritual concepts and ideas that, in a way that I hadn't thought of before. So I had new ways of thinking, new ways of constructing my world in my head. So a new story brought a new way of thinking, new words, new concepts, new incarnations of those concepts. The idea that the world isn't really real is a very, very old one. I don't know about other cultures. I did a paper at university on Hinduism, and there's a concept of Maya. I think it's Maya. Don't quote me. The concept of the world as we know it isn't real. That there's a greater world that's more real than this world. And that concept that there's more is huge, and every time it kind of comes in, we look at reality differently, we experience reality differently, we have different stories to explain reality. And when I say stories, I don't mean a story doesn't have to be fiction or fact to have an impact. A story is just a story. Like, whether it's fact or fiction is actually irrelevant. It's the effect it has on us, individually and as a community. And these days we're passing along all of these harmful stories. Stories that are used to kill people. Stories that convince people to go on murderous rampages with guns. And people who are listening to these stories aren't thinking. They're just taking them as fact, taking them into their identity with no reflection, no conscious criticism of it. They're just, yep, that's a story, it must be fact, I'll take it. And it's making us collectively more and more unwell, more and more dangerous, more and more hateful and cruel. And because the internet's so sort of freeform, and the people who are hateful are so loud, their stories are getting to more people. And we're letting them. Well, not consciously, but every time we pass on those negative stories, every time we engage with those negative stories, we're adding, or at least not fighting, that negative, that hatred, that spiritual illness, I guess. The stories that make us hurt, make us violent, make us hate. And I feel about the world a lot like how I felt as a child with the abuse I got from my extended family. There was nothing I could do. Nothing. I couldn't stop them. I was a kid. I had no power. I can't go overseas and arrest the people murdering other people. I can't even really engage in them because they don't listen. They're so enamored with their hateful stories, their hateful ideas, and their hateful beliefs about the nature of reality, having to be so simplistic, so us or them. I can't change them. I can't show them more of the world, show them what they're missing, what they're ignoring in the world. But I can tell good stories. I can tell better stories. And the thing is, one person with a great story, with a positive story, I guess, it's probably a better definition, because it's not up to me to say whether my works are good. It's other people's position. But if we counter their horrible stories together with positive stories, with wiser stories, with stories that don't encourage hatred or violence, or at least get people to think more, we're then countering these horrible beliefs, these horrible stories about other people that are causing others to be murderers. One person with a story can't change the world, but if lots of people engage with that story, if they take it into their own identity, take it into their own worlds, do fan fiction, do cosplay, do artwork, engage with the story together, we can fight back against all of this stuff. I have no power. I have no money. I have no way of changing the world other than my one vote on election year, which I think is next year. And it's not even the right election because a lot of the violence is overseas. But I really truly believe that the Time Speaker universe is the kind of story that could help transform the world. Not from a, get rich, get famous kind of point of view, but from the point of view of changing how people discuss the world, asking questions that people don't ask yet. Like in Rise of Hawk, the rebels fight the agency because the agency is an oppressive fascist government that's trying to enslave them. So they have to fight or surrender, so they choose to fight. But at the end, the way they choose to fight is violence, like it's with explosives, and it hurts them. That's not who they want to be. And that asks the question, is violence truly the correct response to the world as it is right now? Now, I'm not saying everyone should get all happy clappy and, light themselves on fire as protest, although that is a very effective method. Asking the question in the narrative isn't about getting a specific answer. It's about getting people to think about it. It's like philosophy. I did my degree, my bachelor's is in philosophy and study of different religions. And the ethics paper, 3 of them, but the ethics papers, it wasn't about finding the right answer, particularly moral dilemmas. It was the journey of discussing the options, asking all the questions, figuring out what answering the questions involves. You don't just get an answer, you don't just get an end. The means is more important than the end. I learned how to think, I learned how to ask questions, how to hold an idea that I don't necessarily agree with, but I can hold it and look at it from lots of different angles. Ask the right questions, knowing to ask those questions. Why are none of these scary mass shooters, why are they not thinking, oh look, I want to murder people. Do you think this is good? They're not even asking whether murdering people is good or not. They think that it's the end answer because they've been told it's the end answer. They think that annihilation is the only answer to what they perceive to be a threat. Because their narrative, the stories that they've been taking on into their minds, into their hearts, into their world, into their identity, doesn't even ask the question of whether it's the right answer. they've got a problem and they've been given only one answer to the problem, when there are lots of other answers. There's also the question of, is it really a problem? No one's asking all of those sorts of questions because no one has the narratives, the stories, the myths to engage, to learn how to ask those questions, to learn to think to ask those questions. They're just taking it on the belief in the one problem and then the belief in the one solution to that one problem. When there's billions and billions of answers and problems and questions and ideas, because the narratives that they're taking on are so narrow that there's no room for anything else. It's like computer games. A vast majority of computer games are like violent ones. I'm not saying violent games are bad, because, you know, I play Minecraft and I used to play Unreal Tournament. But when we live in a world where a vast majority of gamers think that the only kind of game that's fun is murder that person and violence. They don't think, oh, there's lots of other things that I could be doing with my gaming time. And so they never try, they never think, they never question. They think gaming equals first-person shooter. Gaming equals a problem that can only be solved with violence. And then all problems look like violence as the solution. We need more dynamic stories, more dynamic ideas and questions to engage, to question the world, to experience the world through. And I believe that TSU and a number of other stories out in the world can help ask those questions. The problem is we can't add those questions to the mass mind, to the mind of a vast majority of people, until it gets out there. It's like having a key by being too far away from the lock. And we have to engage with a story. We can't just consume it like McDonald's or coffee or whatever. Stories were originally much bigger than some form of temporary entertainment. You told the same stories over and over and over again with different variations, sometimes different outcomes. That's how humankind used to explore what it is to live, what it is to discuss problems, how to figure out different ways of solving those problems. They would tell the same story with a different outcome, or a different character, or a different focus. While X thing in the main story is happening, this is happening on the side, and this is what happens. Which is why mythologies changed. Myths and fables changed because they were modified by the tellers, by the storytellers, to explore the world, to explore the problems that people have in the present. And I mean the infinite present, the present of each individual throughout time, not like right now, which is not actually one place, multiple places. I was told multiple times as a kid that my obsession with story was unhealthy or strange or obsessive, and maybe that might be part of my problem trying to fit in the world, is because I see things in a completely different way. But I also think the world has forgotten the power of story, the power of not only an individual person's story being shared, but also how that story interacts with other people, with a community. You give a community new stories to tell, and they look at their world, they look at their life, they look at their choices and the problems in their lives from a different perspective. You change the communal and individual stories. You change how we view it. You change your perceptions of it. So many people think the world is dying right now. And yeah, we've got some problems. But unless some irresponsible prick presses the big red button and explodes the world in nuclear flames, we're not dying. We have troubles, we have problems that are worsening. The longer we not do anything about them. But there's all this hope. There are all of these unanswered questions, unexplored outcomes, unexplored solutions. But we're too busy running around going, oh no, the world is going to end, to actually stop and go, okay, I'm a little scared, but what can we do to change this? And then actually get off our asses and change it. Because we're not going to change it with one person, the right president or the right prime minister or the right whatever. We're not going to change the world to be better and kinder with one great leader. The age of the world that tells the story of the hero's journey is over. The new hero's journey is a community hero, where a whole community comes together to change the world, to fix the problem. And it doesn't have to be violence either. The solution could be really simple, but we're too busy running about being afraid or thinking that violence is the answer, when there are all of these other solutions. We have to have the right questions, the right stories, to learn how to solve the problem in new ways, or even just to see that the problem isn't actually a problem. And all of this in mind is the reason why I've actually created my writing universe to be too big. It's too big for me to write in. I can write for the rest of my life. I won't even get 10% through the history. It's massive, and it's deliberately massive. I've made it huge because I don't want to be just the only one telling the story. I mean, it's my story, so I like to have a little bit of control. Because, it's my creation and I spent my entire life on it. But I've made it deliberately huge so that other people can join in. Other people can add their stories, their artwork, their creations, their cosplay, their ideas. And those ideas and those questions and those stories become a part, or can become a part, of TSU. I've made TSU to be not just my story, but lots of other people's stories too. Within reason, there's no wrong story or wrong way of speaking. I mean, TSU is founded with certain ideas. It's founded from the perspective of people who have been oppressed, people who have been abused, oppressed, murdered, tortured, because they don't fit into the mainstream. People whose identity, whose othered identity, doesn't harm others. It's just that the mainstream doesn't recognise it. And so, as long as I'm alive, I will not allow bigots and abusers to tell their bigoted and abusive stories in TSU. But for those of us who are victims, those of us who have been told repeatedly that they're not people, that they don't deserve basic human rights, basic decency. I want them. I actually want those of us who have experienced oppression to write the stories together. I write my stories, other people can write their stories, and TSU becomes a global or at least community-wide story. It's not just mine. Because if we have the right stories, ask the right questions, or at least open to more, open the collective mind state to more questions, more answers, more views on different so-called problems, different perspectives, instead of all of our society being that stereotype of a person with a hammer sees only nails. We need more than just a hammer. We need screwdrivers. We need sonic screwdrivers. We need lots of different ways so that every problem has its own solution instead of being made into always being a nail, always being a thing that has to be resolved with violence. Because the violence in this world is getting worse, and it's going to kill people. It's already killing people. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'd like our planet and our people to be saved. I'd like for us to stop trying to kill each other. I'd like for us to come to a point of peace. And not the, utopia level peace that people talk about as being fantasy. I mean, a future where we talk first. Where people are able to learn how to see from other people's points of views. Where people are taught to empathize, to understand, taught emotional maturity, taught how to think, how to challenge, how to reason, how to fully reference their beliefs, instead of just taking everything online as fact. We need to learn to question, to ask the right questions, to ask new questions, to look at problems from different viewpoints instead of just the one. We need to stop being a society that only sees nails and only wields a hammer. We need lots of different ways of viewing things. We need diversity. Because same thought, same perspectives. Because our society only ever holding a hammer and looking for nails to bash in is going to destroy us. Whether it's in the long run or in the short term. It's not the way humanity is going to survive. It's not the way we're going to create a new future. We've been annihilating the other for thousands and thousands of years. We've been trying to hammer in those nails, and it doesn't work. We need to ask new questions. We need to find new tools and new views on solutions. And to do that, collectively and individually, we need new stories. We need new stories that ask new questions and get the mainstream to think new thoughts. Because what we've been fighting at the moment it's not sustainable. It's just not. To me, story is the most powerful thing in the world. If you have the right story, you can unite a whole nation, a whole planet. You can ask the right questions or just new questions. You can find new solutions to old problems. You can learn to see problems as not problems. To understand from another point of view that a problem isn't actually the problem you thought it was. And that we can learn, we can grow. Humans are intelligent on lots of different levels. We're capable of growing and changing. We're capable of choosing a new future. But there's not enough of us who can see it. It's not enough of us who can understand that all of these things that people think are facts, like gender, we think it's gender, the ideas of gender, our mainstream ideas of gender, are facts, biological facts, but they're not. We can choose to change the dialogue. We can choose to change what we think things mean. But we have to understand that we can change. We have to have the right stories to get us to understand that so much of our world, so much of our culture is a collective agreement. We agree to believe these things. We agree to believe that pink equals girls and blue equals boys. We agree to believe that skirts are for girls and pants are for boys. We agree. We agree on the side of the road that we're supposed to drive upon with cars and other vehicles. We agree. It's not fact. These are all things that humans have created. We can choose a better way of doing things. We can choose not to hurt people because they're different. We can choose to change our society. But we need the right stories to tell, to show people that they can, that there are new solutions to things. In my story, the bad guys at the beginning are the agency, the enslavers. And the characters fight and fight and fight and fight and fight, and they try to take down the agency, but they can't. Because the solution isn't violence. The solution is something completely different, completely out of left field. But the rebels keep banging on that hammer, trying to make it into a nail. And the best they can do is just survive. And that's where we're at right now. All of us of oppressed groups. All we can do really, right now, right in this specific, precise moment, is to survive. I mean, if someone's coming at you with physical violence, defend yourself. But realizing that violence isn't always the solution, that there are other solutions to everything. Everything has multiple solutions. I mean, other than specific math, formula. But that's slightly different. There will be new solutions for things. But we have to learn how to think differently. We have to learn how to ask new questions. We have to band together and tell new stories. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not sure how successful I'll be, but that's my vision. That's what I'm going to keep trying to do. Tell stories that ask new questions. Tell stories that offer new solutions to old problems. Get people to think. Get people to explore options, explore situations with multiple questions. Not necessarily with the right answers, just asking more questions than we currently are asking, thinking deeper than we are currently thinking. At least that's the theory. Anyway, this is 40 minutes, so I'm probably going to sign off and stop talking. I hope everyone's week is good. Aranitasa.